I think it's actually really important in writing a book because your outline changes and you're not sure like when you're, when you're done.
Yeah.
If you're doing 100 push-ups
Yeah.
and you've done 27 of them,
Yeah.
you're a little over a quarter of the way done and you have
Mhm.
a little less than three quarters of the way left. But a book is not like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we jump in, just a little context about the conversation today. This is a conversation with Dan Pink. It was recorded live inside one of our classes. And Dan has written multiple best-selling books on work, on motivation, and on human behavior. But really what made this special kind of useful was how practical it was. When we talk about why writing feels so disoriented, why progress is really hard to measure, and why most people underestimate how much progress they're actually making. Dan shares a very simple daily ritual that he's used for years to stay motivated while writing and working on long projects. If you've ever felt lost while in the middle of a book or something large, this conversation will give you language and structure for what's actually happening. Enjoy the conversation with Dan Pink. Dan Pink, he is one of the most prolific authors of today, writing a lot on the concepts of business and human behavior, a lot about the premise behind work. And he is a multi-time New York Times bestseller. Two of his latest books are When, and the second book that I was reading here, A Whole New Mind, also Drive, To Sell Is Human. So just a lot of concepts here that I think challenge us. And I would say one of the things that certainly is a favorite for me is this idea here of the concept that he talks about of when we actually best create and those sorts of things. So we'll keep cameras off during the session, guys, just so we have a good recording of it. And then when we switch over, we'll get everyone into the conversations with Dan and everything. So that way we have a good recording of it here and we'll chat on it. I think the other thing that Dan is really talks a lot about is understanding your own approach to writing. He talks a lot about having this backlog of ideas and how you actually find what you want to write. And he has a really interesting premise behind this mixture of being social while writing, like again, engaging with other people as well as solitary, and just the importance of figuring out your style to make this work, which I think is something all of us could certainly learn from in our style. How is the best way to optimize things? And he has a ton of resources that I would certainly recommend. His newsletters, he has videos that he does regularly, but one of those people that I certainly think you can learn a lot from. And as someone who's hit it multiple times, I think many of us think, oh, we got one great idea. Dan has captured the human attention multiple times, which is something neat just in terms of how he approaches things, how he thinks about it, how he gathers insights. He talks a lot about the research side of things as well. And I think certainly keeps some good insights for us to learn from and how we gather the next mixture of stories and research and balances those pieces to make it readable. As he shares and writes, I think there's a lot of pieces that we could all, again, just learn from that, the power of communicating. And I think a lot of the insights, not primary research that he's doing, taking from other people, synthesizing and communicating is certainly an art that all of us can, again, learn from in our way a little bit. And so again, while you're running along the way, feel free to drop questions, comments, thoughts in the chat, and I'll do my best here to keep us on track and sharing. And yeah, excited to get the chance to chat with Dan. He also was awarded an honorary doctorate from Georgetown, so always a good sign for a DC guy in that regard. And I think he's someone who is, I was reading as I was preparing for this interview, he's described as prolific and provocative, which I think are two good combinations here to learn from, that we could all again learn from a little bit in our journeys, which is great. So we'll get started here in just a second here and get after for sure. And again, we'll keep cameras off during this session with Dan, and so we can have a recording of it. And then afterwards, we will open it up for everyone along the way. So excited to get to have this conversation. And thanks again, everyone, for jumping in here. I would agree. A Whole New Mind was one that I think, again, a good book in my mind is something that pushes you to re-examine and think about things. And so provocative is certainly the right word to describe it. And I think, again, good insights. One of the things that I wanted to share about it, that I read your recent book, When, that came out here. And I thought it was really fascinating to learn about how you have been talking about when and how it has influenced the way that you write, you create, and those pieces. What did you take from that book that has changed the way you're approaching your work and how you attack things?
Yeah. I mean, actually, Eric, that book actually had its genesis truly in this office,
Really?
truly in an attempt to answer that very question. So what happened is I would, I mean, there's no train like here. This, you can see, this is a converted garage. If you look over there, like a garage, my finger's pointing the wrong way, but you can see it's like that was the garage door. All right. And so I live 22 steps in that direction. Okay. So I would come into this office every day and I would say, okay, should I write now? Should I do my writing later? When should I have a meeting? When should I take a break? When should I do this? And I was making these decisions in a really half-assed way. And that frustrated me. I started looking around for guidance and it didn't exist. And that got me curious. And I started looking at the science because I not even started looking at it. I wondered whether there was any science on this question. And it turned out there was a huge amount. It was spread all over the place. And essentially this book it's actually not a bad way to look at things for people who are future authors, but I wrote this because I wanted to read it.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah.
And that's actually a helpful heuristic, I think, for certain authors, because if you're writing a book that you don't want to read, then it's going to be terrible. You're going to hate every minute of it. Now, now to answer your question, actually, one of the things that it did, the bottom line is I'm much more intentional about my schedule. So I'm much more intentional about taking breaks, and I'm even resolute usually on writing days because I'm more of a morning person than evening person. I carve out a block in the morning and do nothing else except for most days don't even bring my phone into the office. Don't do anything else until I hit my word count. Remember on my first book, what was challenging on the first book that I wrote, which is 20 years ago, was that I'd had a fair amount of experience writing, but I'd never written a book. And I didn't have John McPhee wrote a great book about Bill Bradley, 60 years ago, when Bill Bradley was actually a student athlete at Princeton. And he said, before Bill Bradley was famous, before he played for the Knicks, before he went to the United States Senate, and the book is called A Sense of Where You Are. And that was the way that he described Bradley. And I always thought that was a nice turn of phrase. And so in my first book, I didn't have a sense of where I was.
Interesting.
Because I'd written articles and I was like, okay, I know where I am in an article. I'd written speeches.
Have you figured out a way to help yourself make progress with letting yourself flail too?
Yes and no. One of the smartest things I've done in the last 10 years in terms of my personal work habits is established, it's from Teresa's work, I have established a progress ritual at the end of every day. And so let me give you instead of giving you a coherent, crisp, usable takeaway, let me offer you a long-winded theoretical explanation of what girds this. So one of the problems, what Amabli's work shows is that the single biggest day-to-day motivator on the job is making progress and meaningful work. Okay. The days we make progress, we feel pretty good. The days we don't make progress, we don't feel so good. One of the problems is that we don't always have a good sense of our progress. And this is even more true when we're mediated by Zoom. And it's almost inherently true for people in the solitary profession of writing. What you have to do is you have to be able to give yourself some amount of feedback and a sense of whether you're making progress. And the thing that I do, and I've been doing this for years, I don't even know, Eric, how many years it's been, 8 or 9 years, is that at the end of every day, I actually memorialize my progress. I actually have an email sent to me asking me what I got done today, but you can do it in any way. You can just even keep like a document. You could scribble it in. But what I do is I take a moment at the end of every day and memorialize the progress. The ritual is important here. I stop and I say, what did I get done today? And the reason for doing that is that in most cases, even on frustrating days, you probably get more done than you thought.
Interesting.
Right? And you have to think, because you tend to be, what ends up being salient are the things that you failed on or things you didn't get done, rather than the things that you actually knocked out. So it's like literally 45 seconds at the end of every day. And write that down or type that in. And that's really helpful to me. So it could be, in terms of writing, I like to try to do 500 words a day. So it could be 500 words. It could be that I read through 13 papers. It could be that I solved the organization problem somewhere. It's other stuff. It's not only writing. It's other stuff that I've done.
That's cool.
And that habit is important because we don't have a sense of the progress that we're making. So it's like 45-second ritual that I found really useful.